All right, now we're on lesson 5. And for lesson 5, understanding percents, I will say this is a lesson that if you don't get, you might want to come back and review a couple times because it's a very important process to understand percents. Some students I've had have a very good grasp of it, some of them have a very poor grasp of it. Either way, I'm going to try to show you how to understand what percents are. I'm not going to try to give you a formula here, but just try to give you a general understanding of what percents are and how to use them. So the first question I have here, just put it down, is what does it mean to have 25% of something? And it's very important to understand this one key concept, which is 25% of something is the same as having 25 out of 100 items. So you notice we just jumped from a percent to a fraction. It is out of 100. A percent is something that's out of 100. It's very important to understand because then from there you can really do whatever you want with this. You can reduce this fraction. If you'd like, we can move on over here to our calculator. We can say, okay, well, what does it mean to have 25 out of 100 of something? It actually means we also have 1/4 of something. Okay, this, they all mean the same thing. Well, if you have 1/4 of something, let's say you have 8 apples. Well, you have 2 out of 8 apples would also be 20% or 25%. So understand that if you look at a percent out of 100 and think about it as a ratio in terms of something similar to 25 or 100, 1/4 is the same, 2/8 is the same. We could go on and say 3 out of 12 and so on. If you understand this concept that it's out of 100, these problems are pretty simple to understand and go back to. So let's look at a couple of examples quick together. So what is 25% of 200? We already established that 25% is the same as 25 out of 100. So how many would that be out of 200? Well, if you double this, and your answer is 50. And it's a good way of looking at this type of problem. What is 25% of 200? Well, what percent of 80 is 20? Well, again, if you want to write a percent, we can look at it as a fraction. We just need to figure out what is this fraction in terms of 100. Now, there's a couple ways to do this one. You might like the idea of cross multiplying. So if you look at this, we have x times 80 equals 2,000. And then we can just divide, go over here. And we get x equals 25. This is one way of doing this problem. Is there another way to get to the x equals 25? Of course. We can look at 20 over 80. And if we reduce that on our calculator, we get 1/4. Well, again, we just have to figure out how many is this out of 100. Well, if we multiply this by 25 and this by 25, we get 25 over 100. Or you could just recognize from the previous problem, this 1/4 is the same that we had up here, which is a 25%. And that's also how you can get how many out of 100 would this be? What about a problem like this? 20% of what number is 50? Well, it really doesn't change much. We know that 20% is 20 out of 100. Well, we want to get to 50 out of 100, 50 out of some number, not 100, but 50 out of some number, because it tells us here we have some number. We don't know what that number is, but some number. So a lot of ways we can go about this. Again, if you want to go the cross multiplying route, put an x there, 20x equals 5,000, divide by 20, and we get 250. So that's one way of doing it, just setting up these proportions out of 100 and cross multiplying. If it helps, if you want to think about it a slightly different way, 20 out of 100, let's simplify that. Well, that's 1/5. I'll verify this over here on the calculator. 20 here, we'll put 100 on the bottom, and there's our 1/5. Well, how can we get this top number to be 50? So multiply by 50, and we get 50 over 250, which is the same answer that we arrived at before. So my suggestion would be to pick one of these 3 ways, or one of these 2 ways. I am going to show you solutions ahead going this way. I think it's the most direct, understanding that a percent is out of 100 and just setting up a proportion. So flip over the page and let's try a few on your own. Pause the video now and see how you do. Good. Hopefully you've had some time to work on these on your own. You're not just walking through with me. So let's figure this out. What is 40% of 160? Well, again, we know 40% is 40 out of 100. We want to know what percent out of 160 is that? Well, I'll do my cross multiplying. 100x equals 40 times 160, 6,400, divide by 100, divide by 100, x equals 6,400 divided by 100 equals, I put multiplication. Well, the answer is 64. What percent of 80 is 20? I think we had a problem almost identical to this just above. So what percent? We know the percents are out of 100 of 80 is 20. So let's just do this as a cross multiplication. 80x equals 2,000. Divide by 80. And x is equal to 25. What is 70% of 250? Well, the same thing. We know that 70% is 70 out of 100. So what is that out of 250? Cross multiply again. X times 100. 70 times 250. Divide by 100. Divide by 100. And if you do this in your calculator, you probably shouldn't need to. You should know to get rid of the couple zeros to get 175, but just in case, there's your 175. So good luck. If you need to go back and practice a few of these, pause the video, practice, and best of luck to you.